All right. I want to welcome everybody on Zoom and everybody on live stream YouTube and everybody in the room here to the class that we're going to talk about lenders. This class is on working with lenders. And my hope with this class is to share my experience over the years with how to choose who you work with as a lender and what kind of questions to ask them and how you can create an environment that will provide the best service for your clients. So we're going to dig right in. There are basically 6 elements that we're going to do today. We're going to talk about choosing your lender partner. Why is it important to care about this at all? How do lenders actually do their jobs? How do we work with them? Like as realtors, how do we interact with them? And what are the different types of lenders? What are the strengths of the weaknesses of different types? Because they come in all kinds of types, just the same way real estate agents do. And then we're going to talk about questions you can ask potential lender partners. And if there are any questions, I will take your questions. So that's what we're going to do. So when we think about lenders, we're talking about a really critical relationship, probably the most critical relationship you have on behalf of your buyers. And it's also important if you're a seller, a listing agent, and you're trying to consider offers from a buyer who is using a lender. But let's just focus on the buyer piece. If your buyer works with a lender who, for whatever reason, can't do the loan, they're not going to be very happy. They found the house, they fell in love with the house, they're really excited, but at the end, the lender can't do the loan. It is such an important relationship. So you want to minimize those occurrences. Now, if you referred the lender, then your buyers are going to consider it a reflection of you. So if they're unhappy with their lender experience, who are they going to blame? They're going to blame you. So it's so important we give thought to choosing our lender and think about how we want to proceed here. So that's why it's so important. My recommendation is that you think about developing at least 3 go-to contacts, each of whom who has a different niche or specialty in the lending world. We'll talk more about it. One of the things to remember is that you are choosing a business partner. You are choosing someone that is going to help you to grow your business, help you to serve your clients effectively. Probably the most, if not the most, one of the most important business relationships you're going to have in real estate. So, how do lenders do what they do? First of all, whoever you're working with will call themselves either a loan officer or a consultant or a loan agent. That their names will be different. But that person that meets with you, their job is to pre-qualify the buyer and take the application from the buyer because the buyer has to fill out a detailed application with all their detailed information. But this loan officer, consultant, or agent is going to be your contact and it's going to be the contact for the buyer. They are kind of the face of the business with you. They may have staff behind them that are doing all kinds of aspects of the deal, but they are the ones that are going to be interacting with you most of the time. And when a pre-approval letter is issued that you're going to share with share with the seller when you write the offer for your buyer, or that as a listing agent that you're going to see when you get offers from buyers, it's the loan officer's name that's going to be there, regardless of how many people are involved in the process. Now, depending on how big their business is and its shape and format and structure, that individual may play other roles important in getting the loan done. but their primary role from your perspective is being your link to the process. And so that's what a loan officer is. But we have other people. The number one person that we typically see is someone called a loan processor. A loan processor is the person that collects all the information from the buyer, not necessarily the loan agent. The loan officer, the person we talked to about before, they might give your buyer a link to a portal for them to upload documents. They might meet with your buyer. But the actual collection and verification of the buyer's paperwork is going to happen by a processor. The job of the processor is to make sure that all of the right documents have been provided by the borrower that the lender needs. That would include, for example, W-2s, pay stubs, tax returns, and other documents. The loan processor's job is not to evaluate it, but to make sure it's complete and properly signed. And you can't get a pre-approval or the next step, underwriting. It can't happen until all the paperwork is provided and processed. Usually a pre-approval letter is the fact that they've collected and reviewed the paperwork. A pre-qualification letter is just a phone call with a conversation. But with a pre-approval, the information has been verified. Yes, they still work at ABC company. Yes, they make $80,000 a year. Yes, they earned $200,000 on their tax returns last year. Stuff like that gets verified with this document. It isn't audited. It isn't double-checked. It's just, here's what the borrower is reporting to us for review. And once the lender has this, once your loan agent has this, your loan officer has this, then they can issue a pre-approval letter. And also, the file can go to the next stage. And the next stage is called underwriting. So an underwriter is a person who works in a lending organization. Their job is to assess risk. The job of the underwriter is to make sure that whoever is lending, the actual person putting the money up, it's not your loan officer usually, whoever's actually putting the money in to the escrow is going to be satisfied that they're not, as a lender, the actual financier, they're not taking too much risk. And they employ, or your loan company employs, an underwriter person who is going to study the loan paperwork. And they're not just going to study it. They're going to audit it. They're going to go through every line of that bank statement, every single charge at McDonald's and at CVS Pharmacy, all the debit card charges, everything. They're going to look at all the deductions and all the withdrawals and all the deposits. They're going to go through every line to make sure that it is correct and accurate and does not betray the viability, the legitimacy of the loan. That is to say, it doesn't bring up questions that make it riskier for the bank or the investor to do the loan, right? So they may get a bank statement that shows a $10,000 deposit. So the underwriter will take this back to the loan processor and or the loan officer, and the loan officer will go to your client and they'll say, hey, we need more paperwork to justify till we understand what this $10,000 is all about. So they really look really deep, right? Detailed assessment. Now, after the underwriter's done their job, they will hopefully issue a pre-approval that your loan officer will sign. Sorry, I'm jumping. I said that wrong. When you get to the underwriter, presumably you're already in contract. You might not be, but presuming you're already in contract, the underwriter will report back on the risk and they'll say, yes, everything's okay, or we need more information. And hopefully you get to a point where the underwriter can issue an approval, a loan approval. They call it conditional loan approvals. And there's kind of two stages where they issue these loan approvals. One stage is before documents get sent to escrow. Remember that your buyer has to sign documents at the escrow company before they get the keys. Usually 2 or 3 or 4 days before they get the keys, the lender sends documents for all the loan paperwork. This includes the deed of trust. It includes other loan documents that tell escrow that the loan is going to be done and that the buyer has to sign. And so before those docs go out, you're going to get a conditional approval from the underwriter, and the underwriter is going to make sure that that the level of risk is manageable. So then they'll issue the conditional approval, and that's the first doc. Now that the first thing that happens, and just because they send the documents to escrow does not mean the deal is done from a financing point of view, because there's also something called prior to funding approval. And prior to funding is a secondary condition. So the bank says, we are not going to send in docs until we get a record of employment from the job 3 years ago that you actually worked there. We need to prove that you did work there, blah, blah, blah. Get that and we'll produce the docs. So but a prior to funding condition is we need, it could be an example, it could be anything. We need to see the accompanying paperwork for something from a tax return from last year. The accompanying paperwork, as long as you get it to us, you can go sign your docs. As long as you get it to us in the next day or two, we're good to go, right? That's called a prior to funding. And what happens is the lender will not put the money into escrow. They will not put the money in for the deal to close until all of the conditions, both prior to doc and prior to funding, have been satisfied to the lender's satisfaction. But when your buyer or when a buyer loan is funded, both you, if you represent the buyer, and the listing agent, whoever is involved in the transaction, can be confident that you're 99% of the way there. The funding is the last big step before the buyer closes and gets their keys. Does anyone who's here in the room know what the last step is after funding? Or Mark? I see Mark's here too. What is it? It's recording. It's recording. Recording is the last step. Can you fund and record on the same day? Yeah, absolutely. Very often, the transaction will fund in the morning and close in the afternoon. And I have to tell you guys, this is relatively a new thing. It used to be exception. They used to call it an exception, and it used to be quite unusual. Now it is almost standard. Well, yes. They're distinct things. Closing is the end of the deal, and we consider it closed when it records at the county. Because it is only when it records at the county that we have an official sanctioned transfer of ownership. The deed goes to the new person. But they're pretty synonymous. Okay, so that's what the underwriter does. Now, some people don't like underwriters. Their attitude is, this person's going to mess up my loan, right? But remember that the bank and the investor are putting in the majority of the money in most cases. Most of your buyers, even if they're 20% down buyers, are getting 80% of the money from a lender.
Right.
So who's taking all the risk, right? The bank is taking all the risk, the investor, the financier. So it is completely reasonable for the underwriter to ask lots of questions about the borrower. And borrowers get really frustrated. You asked me that already. I sent you that 2 weeks ago, but it's not the same thing. It's usually a different shade or a different color on it. And what you want to say to your buyer clients is, hey, you jump through whatever hoops they ask you to jump through if you want this house. They're not trying to be difficult. They're just trying to cross the I's, cross the T's and dot all the I's so that the investor lets the loan go through. So it's in your best interest to just grin and bear it and do whatever you're asked. That's the script with your client. But there's another person involved. There's another person or another part of the lending process, and it's called the closer. The closer works with the underwriter to make sure all the final loan conditions are satisfied by the paper provided by the buyer or by third parties. Could be a former employer, right? Could be for an ex-spouse. Whatever the paperwork is, there's usually someone closing the file. Now, if you have a very small loan officer works for a small firm, the loan officer might be doing it, or their processor might be doing it, right? But whoever it is, this person is the one who's actually preparing and sending the documents to escrow. The underwriter doesn't do it. You rarely see the underwriter communicating to escrow. The file comes back from the underwriter, approved, and then somebody, either the closer or the loan processor or the loan officer, sends it to escrow. Okay, it's usually digitally transferred. So the reason it's important, guys, is you may have a buyer situation where your buyer is transferred from his loan officer, then he works with a processor, then he works with a closer. So your buyer, he or she may have 3 different points of contact during the life of this purchase. And you want to let them know, you want to let them know so they're not kind of, we already know that buying a home has got a lot of steps and is complicated. So the more we can sort of set up our buyers to understand what the process looks like and all the things the lenders do, the better we are able to serve them. Do those of you who are here have any questions so far? No? Okay. So how do we as realtors work with the lender partners? How do we do this? Well, first of all, we connect our buyers to them as sources of loans. Hey, Mr. Buyer, I work with Joe Smith, and Joe Smith is awesome. You should talk to him. He can help you get your loan. We all know about that one. But did you know that your loan officer can help you with marketing, or your loan company can help you with marketing? They can help you with lead gen, and they can help you with offer presentation. So let's talk a little bit about each one of those. How might they help you with marketing? Any guesses? How might they help you with marketing?
It's limited, isn't it? Because you can't. What's the word I'm looking for? Collude, I guess. Collude, I guess. Right.
Yeah, there are laws around certain types of swag, but they can help you with marketing. Yes. Yes, they can post your listing. Yeah. Yeah. They can also co-brand a flyer for you to have at your open house. That's very common. You get the lender to co-brand a flyer. They can even be at the open house with you. I've done that, where the loan officer helped me put out all my yard signs, put out all my frames, so I didn't have to do it. And then they sat with me at the open house and talked to people with me. If you have a busy open house, if you're expecting a busy open house, you want someone else there anyway. They can help direct traffic. So that's marketing. They can also help you with your home buyer guides. Some of the bigger ones will help you with your SOI, online marketing a little bit. They're depending on the size of the firm, right? They can help with lead gen. Some of them have collaborations with software tools that they will sell or give you to help you do lead gen from your database. So there's a lead gen component.
Similar to a title company?
Very similar, but not as different. The title company is even more restricted than the lender is. You don't normally see, I mean, I'm not talking about where, like with the title company, you get lists of who to call. I'm thinking more lead gen where they share with you some sort of tool that you can share with your sellers, with your buyers about the value of their home and about sales trends. There's lots of different software tools out there. So you want to ask them about that. But it's not giving you leads per se, or telling you who to call, at least not directly. Now, there's also offer presentation. How can they help us with offer presentation? What if you asked your buyer's lender to phone the listing agent right after you submit the offer to talk up the offer and tell the listing agent that your buyer's financing is solid? Why not? We actually recommend it. It's in the other class I teach, also on YouTube, on offer escrow management. Right? Sorry, no, not that one. Offer presentation. I have a class on YouTube on how to present a killer offer, how to do a really good job with offer. Well, one thing is you have the buyer's lender phone the listing agent. If you're a listing agent and a buyer's agent's lender, the buyer's lender contacts you, that's a good thing. It helps show your professionalism. It helps build up any questions that might be existing about how will the loan go through or not, right? Remember that buyers rely on our guidance. If they don't have a lender, they're really counting on us. And they benefit from our wisdom if they already have a lender. Now, as we talk about loans, I do want to remind you to stay in your lane. You do not want to be giving out finance advice if there's a lender in place. You should not be saying you want a 20% down loan, you don't want a 10% down loan. But you could say, please talk to the lender. It may be better for you to do 20% down instead of 10% down. Remember that that's what the whole lender partner is, to help your buyer figure out the best financing option. There are 3 or 4 types of lenders out there, okay? 3 or 4 types. The first one I want to talk about are banks and credit unions. Banks and credit unions are great. They will be very competitive on rates usually. They will allow you to consolidate your finances. Get your loan with my bank and open a checking account and a savings account, and we'll give you our credit card with an introductory rate. We can be a one-stop shop for you. That's a big plus, right? The other big plus of banks and credit unions is they have lots of physical locations. If it's important for your buyer to be able to physically go to where they pay their mortgage and not pay it in another way, then having lots of locations can be a big plus. The downside with banks and credit unions is that their loan officers tend to be salaried. They tend to be salaried instead of commission-based. What does that mean? Why is that a negative? Yeah, they may not be available outside their work hours. But more specifically, if somebody is salaried, they're going to get paid their salary whether they close 1 deal or 50 deals or 100 deals. But if they have a commission or a bonus structure, they're going to be motivated financially to help get the deal. Each deal done will be important to them. The other negative with the banks and the credit unions is they tend to be really inflexible. If your buyer's circumstances are outside of the norm and they don't fit within a nice, neat box, oftentimes the banks can't do the loan. Sorry, go talk to somebody else. They really, really gravitate towards straightforward cases. The third issue with banks and credit unions, which somebody alluded to, is weak customer service. They may only work certain hours. They may not be available on weekends. They may have so many people that they're helping because they're on salary that they don't give enough attention to your client. So that's it about banks and credit unions. Now I want to talk about mortgage banks. These are very common, and they're probably the biggest group that maybe not. I haven't done a study of it, but I think they're a large group. Mortgage banks. They are not big banks like Bank of America or Wells Fargo, but they are mortgage banks, and they have names. There are lots of different ones, probably dozens. And some of them you may have heard presentations from at offices that you've been to. And they tend to form relationships with real estate offices. Mortgage banks can be a great lender partner. They will also be very competitive on rates. Their loan officers are hungry and usually work very hard to get your business. And they do a lot of stuff in-house. Whereas the big banks might have multiple locations over multiple states where they do things. I once did a deal with a big bank where my loan officer was here, but his underwriter was in St. Louis. Now, this is before we were using video, before we were using the internet so much, so it became a real problem. The only way to connect with this St. Louis guy was via phone or email, and so it was a problem, right? So it's nice to have everyone in the same building, and they can just walk down the hall and get something done. Like, for example, that underwriter. If that underwriter isn't local and you have to email them and connect with them phone, as opposed to just walking down the hallway and bugging them, don't you think you have more more ability to get the deal done if the person is local to you and you can reach them easily, right? On the downside, sometimes mortgage banks can't do specialized loans. Some of them do, some of them don't. You're going to want to ask. Like, for example, down payment assistance programs. Most of the big banks can easily tie in with all the local down payment assistance programs, but some of these mortgage banks can't do them at all. So if you have a buyer who wants down payment assistance, you need to find out if your lender partner, if they're a mortgage bank, can do that. The other thing I have found over the years is that the customer service is hit and miss. It's completely hit or miss. You need to talk to and work a little bit with these loan officers and their banks and their mortgage bank, because some of them are top-notch service, high standard, and some of them less so. So talk to your mentors, talk to other senior agents. What has been their experience with this loan officer at this institution? Then there are mortgage brokers. Now, a mortgage broker is like a real estate broker, technically. You know how as a real estate broker or a real estate agent, we connect buyer and seller? A mortgage broker connects borrower and financier. So they can be incredibly flexible. The mortgage brokers, the good ones out there, are going to have all these agents, all these institutional investors that they can sell the loan to, right, and work with, connect the borrower with. They can be really flexible. And that means lots of loan options too. And it also means competitive rates. It's sort of something we might call the wholesale channel, right? Because they're acting as a broker, they are able to offer your client really competitive rates. And by the way, it isn't on here, but in most cases, mortgage brokers get paid by the investor. So the borrower is not being charged a premium for it going through a broker. It's kind of like our buyers when the seller pays the fee for the commission. It's the same idea. Mortgage brokers are weaker on specialized loan products. They don't normally have tie-ins for down payment assistance loan programs, where the people who provide those programs typically want bigger institutions. Sometimes a mortgage broker is just one or two people, right? And depending on your broker, they may have zero control over loan processing, loan underwriting, and closing. They may not have enough control to give you confidence that they're going to get the deal done. So you sort of want to talk with them. When you're interviewing a broker, you want to ask them about how does their process work? Who handles loan processing? How do they manage underwriting? And how do they manage closing? If it's all the same person, that's an awful lot of work to do, especially if they're also trying to get new business and get new clients all the time. So question to ask your mortgage broker. Now, in my pool of the top three I refer, there are two brokers and one direct lender in my top three. Okay. Direct lender being the same as a mortgage bank. Should call it direct lender. Okay. So which type of lender is best of those three? Are you better to work with a big bank? You recommend your client work with a big bank? Are you better to recommend your client work with a direct lender / mortgage bank or a broker? Huh?
Depends on the situation, right?
Yes, that's the correct answer. It completely depends. It completely depends on your buyer and their needs, right? They may be better served by getting the lowest rate, and Bank of America has a special on now where if you finance a home up to 1.2 million and you've got an 800 credit score and you have 200,000 in reserves, they'll do it for an eighth or a half point off. That might work perfectly for your client, right? On the other hand, if you have a client who needs to pull together $10,000 of down payment assistance to make the deal work, the bank may not be the best choice. You may want to work with the lender that can work with a program that will get them the 10K. Not all direct lenders or mortgage brokers are able to do that. So it might still be a big bank. It depends. So the last thing I wanted to do in this class was talk about things you want to ask. So the whole point of this, guys, is that you begin to develop lender partners that you can refer your clients to and that you can go to with questions as a buyer's agent. Because you want to have this all settled. I would argue it's more important, second most important to after you've chosen your broker is finding a good lender partner. So you want to ask, well, what kind of loans do you offer? Do you do bridge loans? Do you do down payment assistance loans? Do you do manufactured homes and mobile homes? All those types of things. What kind of financing do you offer? How quickly can you close the deal? That's a very important question. Now, a lot of that depends on your borrower. But let's suppose your borrower is 20% down, and you might have one lender who says, I can do that in 14 days, no problem, every day of the week. And the other one says, we need 30. There's a lot of discrepancy. So you want to ask those questions. What is your response time? How are they going to communicate with you, and how are they going to communicate to your buyer? This gets to the question of, do they work weekends? Wouldn't it be helpful if you're at an open house on a Sunday for you to just quickly text your lender partner and say, hey, I have a scenario here. What do you think? How quickly can you arrange for appraisals? So as you guys may remember, the lender does not do the appraisal. The lender orders the appraisal from a third-party company that works with appraisers. Well, the lender does it. You don't do it as an agent. When you get your buyer into contract, the lender arranges for the appraisal. How quickly can they do that? And let's suppose there's a very tight timeline. You only have a 7-day appraisal contingency. Will the lender order the appraisal rush and pay for it on behalf of your buyer to save your buyer some money on the rush appraisal? Because I promise you, the appraisers charge a premium if you want it next day, right? What special programs do you offer? Notice I didn't say down payment assistance here, because there's a lot of other special programs that come and go that are short term and that are special ways that they try to entice people to use them. You want to find out about them. You want to say, what do you do? What is special? Where do you do most of your loans? That's an important question. If you're interviewing someone and they are based in Santa Clara County, and they don't ever do loans in Alameda County, they're probably not a good fit, right? You meet, your buyer says to you, I want to work with Joe Smith. I worked with him when I sold my home in San Diego, and he's based down in Carlsbad, which is just north of San Diego. You want to have a conversation with your buyer. That may not be the best fit up here, because even though they may be licensed to do it, it's the same as if we were trying to represent a buyer or seller in Bakersfield. We wouldn't do that. We would refer it out, or at least I would be recommending we refer it out, because we simply don't know the local market conditions, right? It's true for our lenders. How will you help to educate my client? If you work with a lot of first-time buyers, you want a very patient lender, someone who's going to be willing to spend an hour on the phone answering all their questions about their loan and helping them to figure out all the situations. You want to ask them how they do that. And some of them will respond in a way that doesn't make you feel good. If someone says to you, a lender might say to you, listen, I'm not going to be doing that. That's your job, right? But there are questions you won't know how to answer about the loan that you'd want them to be able to help them. Like, for example, should they do 20% down, or should they do 15% down and pay mortgage insurance premiums so they can lower their monthly payment? What about the value of prepaid accounts? Should the borrower put money in upfront for taxes and insurance, or should the borrower pay it as it occurs and not be part of the loan? You can help with that, but it would be very good for the lender to provide an opinion for the borrower. A question I like to ask these guys is, what makes you different? Why should I work with you? Remember that you guys are in the driver's seat. You guys have so many lenders that are pursuing your business. If you haven't noticed it already, there's always lenders making presentations at our offices. And we have our in-house lender that is someone you would always want to check out. And all of these lenders will say they have a different differentiation from each other, why you should send them your business. Some of them might say, because we've got this great app that's going to make it easier for your borrower to know what's going on every step of the way. Another one might say that, well, it's because we have the best communication and we work Saturdays and Sundays and you'll always be able to reach someone live at any time of the day. Or some of them might say, we have these specialized loans that are perfect for buyers and sellers who bridge loans. We do the most amazing bridge loans. We can help people who want to sell and buy around the same time. So understanding what they consider to be their secret sauce, so to speak, this is no different than when I ask agents to develop a value proposition. It's the same idea. Now, a question that you might want to ask when you get a buyer who comes to you with a pre-approval already is, are there any red flags, Mr. Lender, that I should know about this borrower? Are there anything going on with their situation that is of any concern to you at all once we get into contract? Because sometimes you'll get into contract with a pre-approval letter with a lender you don't know, and it isn't as good as you thought it was, right? And the deal is in trouble because the lender pre-approval letter doesn't seem to, now there's all these problems that no one expected, right? So you might get ahead of that by asking that question, especially if it's not your lender that you've recommended. But if you're the listing agent, you would ask this question too. You know, you're on the phone with a buyer and they've got a offer on the table. I don't care if it's a competitive offer situation. If you're a listing agent, you should be calling the buyer's lender, even if they're 20% down. And you should say to the buyer's lender, tell me about your borrower. Have you worked with them before? You know, have they met with you in person? You know, how do you feel about their ability to be able to close this deal? Do you have any concerns at all about them? Right? So as a listing agent, you'd want to know. But as a buyer's agent, you should know too. And then the last question, and this is just a partial list, guys. This is not an exclusive, complete list. Another question I would recommend you do is ask them, how will you help me grow my business? They are asking you for free leads. They want free leads from you. Oh, send me your buyers. I'll get them pre-approved. They're going to make money off of your leads, whether the lead buys anything from you or not. What are they going to do for you? Ask them. The better ones will have a whole program for their real estate partners, right? Does anyone have any questions?
So what is your lender's program for you?
So the question was, what are my lender's programs for me? So I don't know that they have specific programs just for me, but I chose them because they are all excellent at responsiveness to my client. For me, I didn't want this business where the lender wasn't there at whenever they were needed. I wanted some lenders who were there on the weekends. I also wanted lenders of personal integrity who will do what they say they're going to do. I had a couple of situations earlier in my career where the lender blamed their own borrower, my client, for mistake the lender made, right? Which should never have ever happened. They said, oh, your borrower didn't give us the right information. Well, it was not something that they couldn't look up very easily themselves to verify. They should have verified it. So I don't like that kind of business, right? And I also have had situations where not only was communication bad, but they weren't working closely with the other people involved. So they couldn't get a hold of the underwriter. And so it was like the file was up at underwriting. It was like a black hole. Nobody knew what was going on. And meantime, the buyer's getting more and more and more stressed and frustrated. The deal ultimately closed, but the buyer was furious with this lender who had ghosted her for days on a time. And who do you think that buyer? I had referred this lender, so the buyer blamed me. I lost that person. They never worked with me again. They blame me for that referral, even though it was not really my fault at all. But I referred them, so it was my fault. This is why I'm very passionate about this. However, it depends on the situation. Like I do a lot of work with first-time buyers. So I'm very interested in lender partners who can help my first-time buyers with down payment assistance programs, who can offer layered financing, which is important to my group. So it really depends, right? But those are some of them. Communication, workflow, and integrity, and multiple loan products. There's no such thing as the perfect lender. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want to ever only refer one. What I typically do is I give them the list of 3 and I say, this one is good at this. This one is good at that, right? If they said they want to sell and buy at the same time, I might say this one is best at that. If they say they want someone who's going to give them the very, very best rates, I usually say they're all going to give you great rates. Call them and see, right? See, your borrowers often get really hung up about rates, but if they're first-time buyers, that's only part of the story of getting the deal done. Now, both of you who are in this room with me, you've had deals already where you represented the buyers. Did you have any issues with the lenders? Yeah, what happened with your lender?
Send me pre-approval letter.
Yeah, the lender sent a pre-approval letter. I'm repeating it for the audience on YouTube who won't be able to hear you.
Later on, they said like, we have to put buyers who won't be qualified for the.
Right. So the pre-approval letter said one thing, that he was a qualified pre-approved, but then the lender said, sorry, we need more buyers on the deal because he can't qualify by himself. Now, that may or may not be the lender's fault. It may not be the lender's fault. Let's suppose that the borrower wrote on their application that they made $80,000 a year, but they really only made 75. So it may not be the lender's fault, right? Because the lender will qualify and pre-approve based on a review of what the borrower sends to them. So the assumption is that the borrower is telling the truth. And their second assumption is that the borrower actually knows. They're giving accurate information, maybe not lying, maybe they just don't know. So that's why this problem happens. You can have the best lender in the world and they get into contract at a certain price and then they find out, well, there was something not right about the income that was reported. And that's why when you have a loan pre-approval, it is not a done deal, which is why you need a loan contingency. And if you're representing a buyer, you have an obligation to talk to that buyer's lender before you write non-contingent on the loan and say, your borrower wants to go non-contingent. How solid is their financing really? Yeah, have you verified anything or has it just been processed? And ask.
So it's always good to put one of the contingency, like appraisal.
So when you represent, the question was, is it always good to have a contingency? So remember that you are a fiduciary for your buyer client. So you want to give them the maximum protection possible, right? And I have a whole class on YouTube about contingencies that you can watch about how to manage them in a deal. But I would say that if you have a finance deal, having a loan and an appraisal contingency is your default position. And if your buyer wishes to lift them, you have to have some conversations with your buyer about the risks. Okay, because remember, the money doesn't transfer to escrow until the end of the deal. So if you have a 25-day deal and the buyer is pre-approved, and let's suppose there's nothing wrong, but you don't have a loan contingency, what could happen? Let's suppose you have a 10-day loan contingency. Forgetting the buyer not qualifying because of a financial problem, there are at least 2 things that can go wrong that would prevent them from doing the loan, and they might be obligated to need that contingency to back out of the deal or else lose their deposit. What are 2 examples?
They'd be on the hook for losing their deposit.
Yes, that's right. That's the implication, Mark. But the question is, what circumstances would arise if you have a well-qualified borrower and they don't have a loan contingency, but they do have a loan? What are 2 things that could happen that would mean they wouldn't get the loan through no fault of their own? 2 really bad things. Well, they could lose their job, or someone else on the loan could lose their job. Right. If you don't have the loan contingency and you lose your job, technically you're still on the hook for the deposit.
Okay.
They do on the bank.
They do it at least twice. That's a lender question. The question is, how often does the lender check to see the person still has a job? We know they do it at the beginning to do the pre-approval, right? And we know they probably do it during processing after they've got a contract for a house. And they certainly do it before funding, after it comes out of underwriting. So I think they do it 2 or 3 times. But that's a question for your lender partner. How often are you checking? But if your buyer is worried about losing their job, they better have a loan contingency. But if they are not worried about it, if they're very, very confident their job is safe, and they're very confident that they can buy the house, then that would be a discussion they get to make. You don't get to make the choice, by the way. Your job is always to recommend they have a contingency for their loan. It's their consideration. Do they want to make their offer stronger by taking it away? And you have to talk to them about the pros and cons of it. So they could lose their job. Another thing that could happen is that what I was thinking is about something having to do with the fires, right? We have these terrible fires right now in Southern California. So you could see a scenario where they're buying a house right next door to where the fires were, but let's even take it differently. You could have insurance rates skyrocket. So they get a quote for insurance after they're in escrow, after the fires, that's $200 a month or $300 a month more than the quote they had before the fires. Not their fault. Now they can't get the financing. They're priced out. They no longer can afford the monthly payment. So I'm thinking of, since there are going to be scenarios. So you don't want to, you could have a natural disaster that changes the market conditions. Yeah. And whether the seller is willing to return the deposit or not is a negotiable thing. You know, certainly if your borrower passes away, you would think the seller would be quite happy to return the deposit. Or more likely, if the borrower had a death in the family and had to go to India or go to China, that would be, even without a contingency, many sellers would be sensitive to that, right? Or if the borrower was buying a new place as an investment, but then they lost their principal residence in the fires. I mean, there's going to be a lot of weird situations. So many sellers may choose out of goodwill to be gentle and not try to collect the deposit. But if there is no loan contingency, they certainly can go after it. It is certainly, the contract is the contract. It doesn't have an exclusion for natural disasters. Yeah.
So what if the Fed just raise the interest rate?
Yeah, it depends when. So most of the lenders that I work with, most of the borrowers I work with, after they get into contract, they are told by the lender, let's lock the rate. The question is, what if the Fed raises interest rates, right? So if the Fed were to raise interest rates before they lock the rate, like dramatically, then, and they don't have a loan contingency, they're still obligated to get the best loan they can, subject to the line in the offer where they specify the maximum interest rate. So you protect your buyer by specifying a maximum interest rate with your loan contingency. If you don't have a loan contingency, it doesn't matter what the interest rates are. Another reason to have a loan contingency. So if you don't have a loan contingency, you can't put in whatever percentage you might put in on the contract as the maximum, doesn't create a new contingency on and of itself. You have to have the loan contingency. So you use your loan contingency.
How do you arrive at that percentage?
I ask the lender, what should I put? I always say to my lender partner, what do I put? It's a great question. You know, you don't want it so low as to make the seller's agent think your borrower isn't serious, because nobody can get a loan like that. And you don't want it so high as to put your borrower at risk.
So you're doing that when you're writing your offer, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You don't. So this is such a valuable tool, because when you have a loan contingency, the contingency is not only that they can get the loan, but they can get the loan for the rate on the offer or less. Very important power. Very, very important power. Because if they didn't have their rate specified on the offer paperwork, then what would happen is the seller could say, hey, I have a hard money lender. I have an equity lender who will do it for 10% with 4% points over a 1-year deal. You have to do that one. He'll do it for you, right? I'm not saying this is particularly happens very often, but you leave your borrower open for someone else making the decision, and you don't want that ever. You never want that. That was a great question, though. Do you guys have any other questions? Okay, so that's all I had on this.
I do have one.
If you want,
I do have one quick question. It's kind of on the
Go ahead,
topic.
Yeah.
Online banks. There was some issue, to refresh my memory. There's some issue with closing. It could delay closing in some way.
So I'm not a big fan of working with online banks because their customer service is notoriously poor. You're only ever doing stuff online. You can never talk to a live person. And even if you can, they might be in another state and not really know anything about the local circumstances. So I'm not a big fan. They are great for refinances. They might be great for refinances, but I do not like them for for purchase money loans. But I'm not aware of this issue that you're specifically asking about closing.
Yeah, I thought I remember hearing something in conversation that it can delay the closing in some way, but I don't remember what that was.
I guess it depends where they're based. If they're not a California-based lender, there may be issues with not knowing the right paperwork for California.
I think that was it. I think that was it.
Work with local lenders, guys. And don't and discourage your buyer clients from using online banks. You know, there's a competitive, it isn't in the presentation, but there's a competitive issue here too. If you're presenting offers and there's 3 offers, and one and you're representing the seller now, and you get 3 offers, and one, they're all 20% down. One is from an online bank, one is from a big bank, and the other one is from a very well-known and highly regarded direct lender mortgage bank. You, as a listing agent, might go to your seller and say, Mr. Seller, all of these offers are great. If any one of them has any advantage, it's the one that's using Joe Smith over at XYZ Mortgage, because I've done deals with Joe Smith. He's great, right? Or I know they're a direct lender. They're going to take more ownership of this file. He phoned me. The other 2 didn't phone me. That sort of stuff. So it can be very important from a competitive angle.
Thank you.
That is dependent on your borrower and the lender. So remember that when you're choosing closing dates, you want to talk to the borrower's lender before you put it in the contract. You and the borrower might want to close in 15 days, but the lender may say, well, because of this X, Y, and Z, we need 21 days, right? It is really a function of the 3 of you dialoguing together, talking together about it. I would also recommend that you talk to the listing agent, because a fast closing is sometimes going to hurt you. You may have a seller that really wants all 30 days. They don't want to close fast. They need to move. There's so much crap in the house, and they will more be really breathing a sigh of relief if you're not asking for a fast close. So it can work against you. You really want to talk to the listing agent before you write the offer and say, what's important to your client? Do they want a fast close? Like I have a situation right now where the listing agent, where I thought the property is being sold by a person who's put a lot of money into the property, they remodeled it, and now they want to sell it, get the money out of it. They're going to lose money on the sale from what they purchased it for. They're selling sooner than they wanted to. They don't live in the property. So I made an assumption in my mind, they probably want a fast close. And I spoke to the agent representing the seller, and that seller, the agent said, no, that's not important to him. Now, that raises another question. To what extent do you trust the agent on the other side to really know what their seller wants? Everything's negotiable anyway. But at the end of the day, it's all about communication, right? It's all about having conversations with your lender, buyer's lender, having conversations with your buyer, having conversations with the agent on the other side. All right. Mark, do you have any other questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for watching this. And if those of you who are on YouTube, thanks for watching it either live stream or later. And if you have questions, you know how to reach me. My email address is on the screen. And thank you.
Thanks.